Well, Brendan, thank you so much for having me on today. I am Rabbi Dr. Greg Marcus, although I usually just go by Dr. Greg. I usually go by Rabbi Greg. And I've worn a lot of different hats in my career. I'm really new to the rabbinate. I was ordained about a year and a half ago, so I'm a Gen Xer. I've had a lot of different careers. The career I had before I went to rabbinical school is I was teaching and focusing on a Jewish mindfulness practice called Mussar. It's something that teaches us how to find those parts of our soul which cause us to get stuck in the same situation again and again. And then it offers a path towards balance and healing by taking mindful action in everyday life. And the biggest beneficiary of Mussar has been me. It has really helped me become more patient. It has helped me become just a better human being. And a lot of things that used to trip me up are not as big an issue for me anymore. And that's really nice. And my wife is especially happy about that. So that's good too.
That's perfect. That kind of leads, I wanted to ask, in your pre-rabbinic and now rabbinic career, when did Mussar in your life stop being kind of, oh, this is a curious thing I learned about, this is an interest of mine, and when did it start becoming a practice that actually shaped how you kind of lived your life and were leading?
Yeah, so it actually became a practice probably just a couple years after I learned about it. So I learned about it. When my kids were younger, we went to kind of an immersive family Jewish education program where we would go for 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon, and part of it was adults and the kids would be off kind of at their age appropriate things, and part of it we learned together. And one year the theme was Mussar, and I'm like, wow, this is really has the potential to change my life. And I knew that.
So it at least initially resonated. So the first time you heard about it, there was already a spark.
There was, because I used to be a workaholic. I used to work 90 hours a week in the corporate world. That's like 90. That is most, my day off, I only worked 4 or 5 hours. So it was really bad for my health. And the way I got out of it was I had kind of an experience on Yom Kippur, which led me to realize that I'd turned my employer into a false idol. And I got caught up in doing what's best for the company and not what's best. So I made this decision, I'm going to focus on putting people first in my life. And I started making these small, gradual changes. Like, my health is more important than the company, so I'm going to stop working at 9 o'clock so I can wind down and go to bed. And then my kids are more important, so I'll stop working at 7 so I can spend some time with them. And it was these small, gradual changes that really changed my life. And within a year, I'd cut my hours from 90 down to 60 without changing jobs at all. And then a year later, I'd cut my hours from 60 down to 45, which was much more manageable. And at that point, I had changed jobs. So Mussar uses the exact same formula. You take a value, a Jewish value. In my case, it was putting people first. But here there's a whole bunch of different values and a whole bunch of different practices. And you just make these teeny tiny changes. If I had said, okay, I'm working too much, I'm going to stop working at 5 o'clock every day, that would have lasted about a day and a half. It would have caused a huge amount of anxiety. It would have caused a huge disruption in my life. But because I just made these little changes, nobody noticed. And actually I became more effective at work, partly because I wasn't a stressed out wreck anymore. And so I had this powerful, powerful example that I knew that this could work. But interestingly, I didn't do anything for 2 years. Like, I was like, oh, this will change my life. And it wasn't until 2 years later that I approached Rabbi Sarah Weissman, who was at the synagogue I used to be a part of, and told her I wanted to teach Mussar. And she said, oh, that's fantastic. That's great. And I said, but I need to learn Mussar first. She says, okay, no problem. And she paid for me to take an online class, kind of a go-at-your-own-pace class through the Mussar Institute. And then 2 months later, I was reading everything I could get my hands on, and I'd created my first Mussar group, Work-Life Balance through Mussar. And we met 5 times, and everybody's like, let's keep going, let's keep going. So we met 5 more, and we met 5 more. And then 3 years later, I had so much material, I wrote a book kind of capturing all of everything that we'd kind of discovered and the methodology I developed in those classes. So, but from that moment, when I started teaching the class, it started changing my life, and I haven't looked back.
Just in case people don't know, I feel like when I first encountered Mussar more than 10 years ago, it was not commonly known of in the Jewish world, and it certainly wasn't outside that. So when somebody comes and says, give me the elevator pitch, you keep talking about this Mussar thing, how does that fit into Judaism? What is Mussar and where did it come from? And then you go...
Right, so Mussar is a Jewish spiritual practice, and it focuses on a lot of Jewish teaching that people are more familiar with is like following the mitzvot or following the laws. And this is not about, and following the laws is one type of ethical system. This is an ethical system that builds character. So it's, if I bring my truth into balance, if I bring my kindness into balance, I will act in an ethical way in circumstances that the law doesn't cover, because a law can't cover every possible circumstance. So it's a character development, it's a character building. And a lot of people are familiar with the Yiddish term mensch. It's kind of a person of outstanding character. And we all have that ability to become a mensch, and Mussar is a path that can teach us how to get there.
You mentioned you first encountered it, and then you tried it out as an initial spark. You tried it out, and then you had a period where you went to your rabbi at the time and said, I want to teach this. I'm so excited about this. And then you did that. So far in your encounter with Mussar, have you experienced the contraction? So you get this excitement, you try it in your life, you like it, you go to the rabbi, you talked about it feels like it's building. Are there places during the past years where you felt it was especially hard, or you resisted, or it felt like Mussar was unwelcome in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I actually call it the Great Wall of Mussar. Because initially you start making changes and they work and your life gets better and it feels like this is the magic bullet. All of my problems are going to be solved. And then, once you kind of get through the kind of low-hanging fruit, the work is never done. And so at some point it's just like, oh my God, I'm still broken. I'm still making all these mistakes. I still have, and it's a place where I've seen a lot of people give up. And I think I was kind of forewarned that this was coming and that you should just keep going. So that's what I did. But I've talked to people who follow all kinds of different mindfulness practices or yoga practices, and they come and go. And sometimes you don't feel it, and you keep going with the practice as best you can. And then it starts to help again.
In those moments, did it feel like there was something that was particularly difficult that your Mussar practice was asking you to wrestle with? Or did you find yourself working on like a soul trait, a midah in some way, and you're like, it's not resonating, it feels flat? So in other words, did you feel like I'm hitting something hard and I don't like it? Or it's like, I don't know, do I have to go through these things again?
Yeah, it's a little bit more of like the second one, and it's more just like... something really bad happens in the world. There's an presidential election outcome which feels catastrophic to you, and it's just sort of like, oh my God, what am I doing here? But there were a lot of times where I really struggled, and that's kind of part of it. Like there's a great example where when I was first practicing the soul trait of love and kindness, of chesed. And Judaism teaches that there's certain ways we can practice chesed, like, feeding widows and orphans, and visiting the sick, and comforting the mourner, and clothing the naked, which means kind of, providing for people who don't have means and that kind of stuff. So an email came from a rabbi saying, hey, we are hosting this thing called Home and Hope. It's unhoused people have tents set up in our social hall, and we need people to come and be with them and just kind of hang out during dinner and help with the food and whatever. And so I'm not proud to say this, but I was really uncomfortable about that. Like, some people are just all in and, oh, wow, I get to help people. And it just made me really uncomfortable. But I'm like, well, this is the universe telling me that I need to do this practice. And so it's really not about, and Marianne Williamson once famously said, there's no growth in the comfort zone. So I said, okay, I'm not doing anything else. They need help. This is what I'm practicing, so I'm going to do it. And, I would love to say, oh, and I had all these like meaningful experiences and I felt so happy and comfortable afterward. But honestly, I didn't really. I felt kind of uncomfortable the whole time. And I've thought about that. This was years ago, but I've thought about that a lot and what that was all about. But hey, I was there. I talked to a mom and a daughter. We got out Google Translate, and they were amazed at being able to go from Spanish to English, and we had a human connection. So that's that was part of my growth journey.
When you look at now, so the entering into the Jewish life, the entering into Mussar, the entering into rabbinic work, did the way Mussar do things, is that something that would have resonated with you as a kid? Have you always been interested in personal growth, self-improvement, self-realization?
Probably not. I don't think so. I was into achievement. I had a little bit of a rough childhood, and my father always said, well, if you get good grades, you can write your own ticket. You can leave all this behind. So I got good grades. I went to great schools, got really good jobs, but that was kind of what led me on the workaholic path. So that strategy that got me through childhood was not serving me by the time I was in my 30s. So, and I was very arrogant. I was very driven. And, Mussar has helped me and I paid a lot of prices for that in the workplace and in friendships and relationships. So Mussar really kind of helped me soften those edges. And it was later when I was like, oh, I need to start, getting some counseling. I need to start doing some work on myself, that this became a really good tool.
Do you see yourself clearly? Do you remember exactly how you were before Mussar and the way you are after? And does it feel like a clear break, or does it feel like a slow progression?
It's definitely a slow progression. This isn't a magic bullet, but if you talk to people who do Mussar and you hang out, there are certain times where you are just led to do things that might make you a bit uncomfortable, like the example I gave. But I think the best way to answer your question is with a little anecdote. So I had hired somebody to help me with my website, and we were meeting for coffee, and we were sitting outside, and this car came screaming around the corner, going way too fast. And she said something like, well, there's someone who really needs Mussar. And I didn't say anything, but my immediate thought was, if it wasn't for Mussar, I'd probably be that person. It's not like somehow it makes me better or different than anyone else, but I've gained this sort of knowledge of the sorts of changes that have taken place over time. But, it's a slow build, but I do get a lot of satisfaction out of knowing that I'm a better person. And it allows me to show up for other people in better ways.
What are ways in which the people who are in your life have talked about you differently or seem to encounter you differently?
I'm more kind of centered and calm and patient. And when I do kind of make a mistake, like I got sort of angry at a relative recently, I can hang in there and have a conversation and take ownership of my mistakes without a lot of deflecting. And it's painful and it's hard, but part of it is you need to be able to look into the mirror and be honest about your mistakes. But I've also learned, and this is sort of part of it, that you need to give yourself a lot of self-love and self-compassion. This isn't an excuse to start beating yourself up. And I used to be very, very difficult on myself. And I would make a mistake and be like, oh my gosh, how can I be so dumb? Boy, I'm not a very good person. And I used maybe some expletives involved in all of this as well. And, so I can really let a lot of that go now.
What makes Mussar different than therapy culture and psychotherapy? And then on the other hand, you're talking about like holding space and things. It feels close to Buddhism. Again, you mentioned mindfulness practices and meditation, things like that. Where does Mussar fit in that mix in the culture?
Right. So I think it has some things in common with cognitive behavioral therapy, because the way you drive change is by taking action. It's by showing up at the homeless event. It's by, if you're practicing order, it's by using, starting to do checklists or doing things like that. So cognitive behavioral therapy has some of the similar things. Okay, we need to, as you do things, you induce changes. How Mussar is different is there's the tie into values and ethics. So psychotherapy is for a pathology. I mean, I'm not dealing with pathologies. If someone has a mental illness, they need to go see a professional counselor or get appropriate medication. I'm trying to be, how can I go above and beyond the requirements to be just a good person? Like, very simple example, the first time I was practicing the trait of enthusiasm or alacrity, it's just kind of like jumping on it and going and doing things. I was at some event and they were passing the microphone around, and I was sitting on the aisle and the person was about, a distance away, and I basically ran up the aisle and gave it to him. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And there's a mantra that goes with enthusiasm. It was just run to do good. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to run and do good. Now, some people got a chuckle out of it, but for me, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna not waste everybody's time, and that's kind of part of it. It's not a big deal. It didn't save the world, but by doing these small actions in innocuous type situations, suddenly when something really important happens, I've kind of prepared my mental and spiritual muscles to show up in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes very much sense. I mean, again, I think at the heart of Judaism is very much a strong value judgment that you're supposed to become a better person. And Mussar seems like this ideal way, this ideal technique that comes out of the Jewish tradition to do this. But as opposed to psychotherapy, which might say, I don't want to tell you what you're supposed to do. You have to figure out what you're supposed to do, or you have to figure out how you're interacting badly with these people around you. Mussar says, no, there's a right and there's a wrong. So do you think value judgment and kind of, again, that push to be virtuous and good is a core part of Mussar, or some people could come in and use it in ways that don't need to involve that?
No, I think it's a core part. It's a core part. It's a path to becoming a mensch. It's a path to becoming holy, and people may not be comfortable with that term, or they may not know what that means, but it's very much a part of that. And I also want to answer the other part of your question, what about Buddhism? And it also has a lot in common there in terms of, I'm not a Buddhism expert, so I might be running with scissors here a little bit, but there's a way in which, you are focusing on the self, and you're saying, okay, I need to accept that life is suffering, and if I do these kind of practices, I can reduce my own suffering. And I think Mussar has a little bit more of a flavor of, I'm working on myself, not for the sake of myself, but for the sake of other people. It's like, how can I show up to be a better citizen in society, a better member of my community, a better member of my family? How can I be the best version of myself so I can take care of other people better?
So again,
and I'm not sure that flavor is in Buddhism. I think it's more of inward focus.
I think it probably depends. Like, I know there's some strands that sit very much closer to the realizing that they're suffering and trying to get out of that suffering. But then there's, like, again, Mahayana, a second strand of Buddhism that grows, which is very much about the compassion of the Buddha to stay behind. And we're supposed to be like the Buddha, which is compassionate. But it's not quite, I feel like Mussar is very strongly, you're here to make the world better. This is not for, if it makes things nicer for you, but that doesn't feel like the focus. Mussar is supposed to make you feel good and feel nice.
Yeah, no, that's right. And, I think Buddhism is a wonderful practice, and it's really done a lot of good in the world and for people. And there's a lot of, I think, convergent evolution of things that they have in common. But the focus is a little bit different, I think.
What are the levers in Mussar? I know this, and I'm leading you. So what are the levers in Mussar? How does it work? People study Mussar and then they practice it. How?
Right. So a practice, there's sort of weekly cycles and daily cycles. So we'll start with the weekly cycle. So you would start with a particular trait. Like, let's talk about patience. Okay, so I'm going to be focusing on patience for 2 weeks, and then after that 2 weeks, I'll go on to another trait, like maybe humility or order or silence. During that 2 weeks, then there's a daily cycle where in the morning you would say like a mantra or a recitation phrase. And there's different ones. Different authors have written different ones. Sometimes it's a text from, it's a quote from a biblical text or a rabbinic text. And then that kind of frames your day. So the one that I wrote for patience is, this too shall pass, and I have the strength to get by until it does. And I should explain that patience is about being able to endure a difficult situation. It's not about staying calm. Like, we all know what it looks like when we lose our patience and get angry and we get frustrated. But the patience is actually being able to sit with that discomfort without becoming angry and frustrated. If you don't have a challenging situation, you don't need patience. You don't mind traffic, you don't need patience. You're just listening to your audiobook or whatever, and that's fine. So then the next piece, so you would begin like by focusing on or chanting or contemplating that mantra. And then throughout the day, you look for opportunities to take small actions. And I like to think of all of these traits on a spectrum. So if you have too little patience, that can show up in your life by kind of being angry and frustrated a lot. But if you have too much patience, that can be just as bad. And maybe you're staying in a bad job, or you're staying in a bad relationship, or you're not speaking up for yourself. Or if I just keep working away, they'll notice me and I'll get promoted. And well, you might need that may not be a good thing. So it's like, I need to maybe advocate for myself a little bit more. I need to turn on the radio when I'm in traffic to try to get out of this.
Well, that is a fascinating thing, because when you said patience, again, we all just think, patience is a good thing. Patience, the more patience you have, it's like exponential growth. If I'm more and more patient all the time about everything in every way, everything will be better. And Mussar doesn't say that. It's just patience is a virtue, a soul trait, but there's these pulls. You can be too patient and not patient enough, and it yanks on it from both sides.
Yeah, even something like kindness. As much kindness as in the world, great. Well, but if you're doing so much kindness that you're becoming obsequious to other people and you're harming yourself, and it becomes about people pleasing, then that's actually maybe too much kindness, that you need to set some boundaries. So that's kind of part 2, you're taking action, and that's the most important part. And then part 3 is journaling. Often at the end of the day, you write down, where did patience come up? Where was it challenged? How did I do? Did I do well? Did I not do? Not everybody's a journaler. And this is not easy for everyone. And for me, I come and go in journaling. But it really does help. It does really reinforce things. And again, it can be painful, and it's an opportunity to take ownership without self-flagellation. And that's part of the practice too.
There's does it come out of Mussar, that practice of the period of counting the Omer, where you take certain things and match them up with other things? You get 7 times 7, 49 days, the this of this and the that of that. Is that Mussar, or is that out there? Have you heard of
counting?
This?
Yeah, so counting the Omer, is something that goes all the way back to the Torah. So this particular practice, that I think is a little bit like, it does get aligned with Mussar, and they are usually Mussar traits. It's probably a little more closely aligned with Kabbalah, where it's talking about the different Kabbalistic, Sephirot denominations. And there's a lot of overlap with Mussar, but that's probably the origin.
What do you do on the days? So there are days when you're inspired and you notice things. Over the long-term practice of these things, on days when it's a dud, where you tell yourself you should journal, but just nothing comes out, or you said I was supposed to be patient today, but I can't even think about any challenges. It just wasn't a challenging day. What do you do with those days? Does it feel disappointing? Do you let them go, or do you kind of push a little harder? What did I do today? Ugh.
It depends on kind of where I was in my practice. Like early on, when I was really learning and most disciplined, I journaled every day. And maybe it was just 3 words, not much today. And the journaling can be, shorthand and outlines and scribbles, and it doesn't need to be blog post worthy. But if there's just, sometimes a day is just a day, and that's okay. But I have to say, when you're doing Mussar, just things show up. And sometimes a life challenge comes up, and it is exactly what you're working on at that moment. You have the exact tool you need in order to deal with it. And and to wear my rabbinic hat a little bit.
Yeah.
There's this concept of teshuvah, or repentance. When we do something wrong, we want to repent, we want to turn. And Maimonides teaches that someone hasn't truly repented until they're in the same situation and they act differently. But it doesn't say act perfectly. And that's sort of the key, is we want to act differently. If you fly off the handle at your teenager after 2 seconds at the dinner table when they're playing with their food, if you can wait till 5 seconds, that's a win. And I'm not kidding. That is really a win, because, making these small gradual changes, okay, because 5 seconds can become 10 seconds. And I had someone I was working with. I used to do Mussar coaching, and she would fight with her son at the dinner table, and he did some things that drove her crazy, and waiting 5 seconds instead of 2 seconds really quickly led to 10 seconds, and by the third night it led to joking around and having fun with whatever the weird teenagery thing that they were doing. So these it's like you're breaking the dam. We don't want to be doing these behaviors, but you get a small success that leads to a virtuous cycle where you can get a bigger success and a bigger success.
And everybody does want the big epiphanies, but I see what you're saying. It's almost all you're telling people. It's just a softening. It's slight 1% softer that day, and then the next day it's 2% softer.
Right. Like there's this example of, for kindness or for generosity, it's generosity. And I heard of someone who paid for the dinner of another couple at a different table in a fancy restaurant. And wow, that was so generous. And I always found that, and for someone who does that, that's great. But for me, I found it annoying because it set the bar so high that It's like, I'm never going to do that. It's just not who I am. I don't have that kind of money. Even if I did, I wouldn't be comfortable with it. But once you start focusing on that, you forget about maybe there's a homeless person and, oh, I only have a $5 bill in my pocket and I would give them $1, but I only have a $5 bill. Well, you know what? I'm practicing generous, just give them the $5. That I can do. That's a stretch. So if I get too focused on the macro, I need to lose 300 pounds. Well, you lose 2 pounds is a good start.
Are there things you run into before when you first started studying you wouldn't necessarily have, but maybe when you got done with the Institute and were teaching, and now in your experience years kind of instituting this, talking about it, coaching with it, are there things people misunderstand about Mussar when you wander into the Jewish world? Other rabbis or other Jewish educators, people think they know what Mussar is, but they misunderstand this.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is they misunderstand it's a practice, and there was a big Mussar movement in Lithuania in the 19th century, and they started teach. Rabbi Israel Salanter made a lot of innovations for doing Mussar in community and teaching Mussar in yeshivas. And people think Mussar is understanding the history of that kind of little movement there.
Okay.
It's like, here's a little community who did something. Or they think, or some people think, okay, well, I'm a good person, or I'm a rabbi and all this stuff, so I can teach Mussar like a class, but it's not actually something that I'm willing to be vulnerable in front of my community and teach. And so I really feel like if you are facilitating a Mussar group, I call them Mussar gatherings, I call them Mussar groups, I don't call them Mussar classes. You have a Mussar experience. So it's experiential, and if you're leading it and you're not willing to be vulnerable, then it's going to be very limited on the impact that it can have on people.
Well, that's interesting. One thing that may make people, again, allergic to Mussar is it's actually demanding that you do some practice and that you work with it. You're going to work with it over time. Mm-hmm. What about from the other end, or maybe it's the same one, how do you explain or translate Mussar for people who are kind of allergic to personal growth, self-improvement? If you go to Barnes & Noble and look at the self-help personal growth section, you would be forgiven for being a little grossed out by the corniness and the sugariness of it. So if they're like, oh, all this self-improvement stuff drives me crazy, do you have another way you like to talk about it?
I never really thought about it that way, because my philosophy is like, people who are kind of into this, who want to try it, will sort of do so. But I think I do, as a rabbi now, and as a rabbi in a synagogue, I don't talk about Mussar very much. But the Mussar infuses the things that I do talk about. I say things like, well, we all have the ability to cultivate more kindness. We can be like ex-biblical character. We can be like Rebecca, who went the extra mile giving a pail of water to each individual camel instead of just putting it in the trough. And so that's Mussar. It's Mussar infused. And it's like, well, wouldn't you like to be able to do this? And so that, I think, may reach a broader audience. And then people who kind of want to go deeper, that's there. But that's very much my sensibility, is like, we have personal responsibility for how we show up in the world, and that's kind of what I would focus on.
Okay, you gave me the perfect transition, because I did want to ask, when did Mussar and teaching these classes and your experience in education turn into, I think I want to get smicha, I think I want to become a rabbi now?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So I had a really good business coach, and he focused on like people with spiritual type businesses, yoga centers and meditation practices. And so I was trying to build a business around Mussar and to do one-on-one coaching and speaking and teaching and facilitating groups. And there really wasn't a business to be had there. It was just a little bit too niche. Um, and one of the things he helped me understand is he said, hey, and you're also not a rabbi. And I think for Jewish groups, they like to see the rabbi credential. And so I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. He's like, but why don't you think about a niche? Like, go get a niche. Go after like a really small group. Or maybe it's parents. Maybe it's... So I went and I thought and I said, I really want to help people connect more deeply with their Jewishness. He's like, that's beautiful, but that's not a niche. So, and he was Jewish. He was kind of very much in the, kind of secular social action oriented. So he wasn't completely, outside of the realm. So I'm like, all right. And then I was networking with another rabbi who did something for a group that is called Interfaith Family, and it's now 18 Doors. And I had a great talk with her, and she said, have you ever thought about being a rabbi? Because you seem to have a rabbi soul. And I said, well, there's no, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's no rabbinical school here. And she said, oh, there's this place in LA which has a program that you can attend remotely, or it's a hybrid program, sometimes in person, sometimes remote. So, 6 months later, I started in the program because I realized that I did want to help people connect more with their Jewishness. I did want to, and I needed more tools. Like Mussar is a fantastic tool, but it's not for everybody. And there are just other tools that are more appropriate in other circumstances. So that was how I made the transition.
Did you know already going in? So first, you are Jewish. You live a Jewish life. You got Jewish children. You got a Jewish family. And this Mussar sparks you, and you get excited about Mussar. But then somewhere along the way, the coach or somebody, you become aware, oh, I'm not just into Mussar, I'm into Jewishness, and I want people to be excited and engage more with their Jewishness. So it's a much wider thing. Did you know going in, did you want to have did you have a vision that you wanted to be a pulpit rabbi, or you wanted to be, I want to be a freelance life cycle rabbi, or I want to be the Mussar rabbi? Did you already have an idea what you wanted to do with this rabbinate?
So where I ended up was very different from where I began. I didn't want to be a Mussar rabbi. I felt like there are other Mussar rabbis that are out there. I didn't feel like being a rabbi would add that much to my Mussar practice. And I said, if I want to do Mussar, I'm just going to keep getting Mussar. It's a huge amount of work just to get 3 more people to show up at a free Mussar thing, So I definitely did. But it was funny. People wouldn't let me leave it behind. Enough people had heard of me, and they were always asking me about Mussar and what have you. And it remained a part of my practice. And I was pretty unhappy with a lot of my synagogue experiences. And so I didn't think I wanted to be a pulpit rabbi. And I thought maybe I'd be teaching and writing books, or I didn't know completely. And it was also funny because there's this Mussar trade called trust in the divine, where it's like, you need to just trust that things are going to work out. And even if you don't believe in God, you can trust the universe, things. So I went in, I said, I'm practicing trust here, that the right thing will be there for me in 5 years, because I've never known what I'm going to be doing in 5 years. It's just too far away. But then I had a wonderful internship at a synagogue called Beth Jacob in Redwood City. I had a really great internship doing grief counseling at a place called Mission Hospice, which was in San Mateo, California. And I got more comfortable with kind of leading prayer and understanding kind of the way Jewish community worked. And I'd been a solopreneur, and I wanted like an anchor community. So I became interested in becoming a synagogue rabbi, but I didn't want to be part of a big, giant synagogue with lots of rabbis. I wanted a very small place where I could get to know everybody. And I'm happy to say that's what I found. But there's so many different ways to be a rabbi, but I'm really pleased with kind of how it's gone for me so far.
Is there something, so kind of heading in, you had one vision of what it would be like, and then you went through the 5 years, your vision of where you might want to go changed. Did your feeling, because you grew up with unless you're a convert like me, you grew up with rabbis in some way, if you had any kind of encounter with Sunday school or, high holy day services, whatever. Did your vision of who rabbis are and what they do change significantly over your 5 years? Or by then you I've been around long enough, I kind of know what a rabbi looks like and feels like?
Oh, my vision totally changed. The Academy of Jewish Religion, California, it's a trans-denominational school. And so there were people there that ranged from secular, humanist, atheist to modern Orthodox. And probably the majority of students were Reform, like myself. I'm a Reform rabbi today, or conservative. But there was just a huge variety. And there were Sephardic rabbis and students, and there were Persian students, and we had cantors, and we had chaplains, and the ages ranged from the 20s to the 70s. And there were just and I listened to podcasts like Judaism Unbound, which talk about kind of Jewish innovation, and I'm part of Jewish innovation cohort. So there's just so many different ways that people can be Jewish and do Jewish. And there's just so many different ways that you can be a rabbi to them. And I developed kind of my own sensibility about what's important to me and what I want to focus my teaching on.
How did your practice of Mussar change or adjust, or maybe not at all, during your years of rabbinic school and now into your pulpit rabbi? You mentioned one thing, which is I don't need to click the thing and have big neon letters that say Mussar. I can mention important traits in life and in people. I don't have to call it out all the time and say Mussar. How did your Mussar practice change in rabbinic school and then after?
Well, I started rabbinic school in the fall of 2019. And the biggest change...
What a time to start.
Yes. And so the biggest change to my Mussar practice was COVID. And we had been in person and on Zoom. We went to a complete Zoom immediately in rabbinical school. But in March 2020, the world shut down. And everybody was home. And I was like, oh my God, we need to be together. So I just called, I emailed. I have, a few thousand people on my email list, and I send out emails every couple of weeks. So I sent an email and said, we need to be together. Come to this, Mussar gathering. And 30 or 40 people showed up, which is 25 more. Probably most people I'd ever had for anything was 5, right? So it was something we really needed. And kind of like that initial Mussar class that was supposed to go 5 times, we just haven't stopped meeting. We're still meeting almost 6 years later now. And almost every week, unless I go on vacation. And so that became a free 1-hour Zoom drop-in Mussar group. And it really formed a real community, which isn't something that I knew would happen online, but there are people mostly all over North America. People watch recordings from other parts of the world, but then somebody died a couple of years in, and everybody's crying on the Zoom, and people are, who'd never met in person really felt this strong connection. And then people started getting together offline, I was in New York and I got together with so-and-so. So really deep connections happen. And when you're facilitating Mussar, you have to be very in touch with your own practice. You need to lead from the front, but also if someone's doing something that pushes your button, that's part of your Mussar journey. Oh, what's up for me? This person's talking too much and I'm getting frustrated, impatient. And okay, well, it's my job to set boundaries, but I need to do it in a kindly way. Or someone says something that's a little bit in left field. Well, I need to say, great, what an interesting idea. And, And I learned so much from the group. They're really wonderful people, and it's a fabulous experience.
One of the things you mentioned, a misunderstanding from rabbis sometimes, is that I can just teach this Mussar and I don't have to be vulnerable and open up and practice it myself necessarily. That vulnerability, rabbis deploy vulnerability very carefully and thoughtfully because they're afraid of people, again, unfair judgment, or I don't want to muddy the waters, or I don't want to tell people, I don't want to harm whatever. I need to hold this mantle in a different way than I hold my regular life. Well, for a long time, you just got to be the Mussar coach, and however you wanted to be vulnerable, it's with that client or that group, but that's it. How did your permeability with Mussar and your vulnerability, has it changed significantly, or like, no, I really tried to keep it vulnerable and be open about all this stuff?
There's levels of vulnerability. I mean, our group, we meet on Zoom and everything is recorded and is up on YouTube. So it's not the place to kind of go as deep as you might in a private Mussar group. But there's a saying, when I was getting my training as a grief counselor, like the therapists, they say, it's okay to talk about yourself for the sake of the client. And so I don't adopt that completely, but I am very mindful, and I'm vulnerable also from the pulpit as a rabbi. And I will, when I'm giving my sermons or when I'm talking one-on-one to people or when I'm talking to kids, I try to be vulnerable all the time. But I do it in a way so that they don't feel like they need to start taking care of me. It's not about, oh, poor Rabbi Greg, he has such and such going on. It's like, okay, this is what happened, and this is how I dealt with it, and I'm okay. And we all make these mistakes, and here's how Jewish teachings help me learn from it. So I think that's really important because I've seen incredible rabbis get put on a pedestal. And I've seen them be I was on the board of a synagogue, and the head rabbi was fabulous, and she was really uncomfortable that she was on a pedestal. But, that's kind of where it was. Once it kind of happened, it was hard to get out of. So I'm like, I don't want that to be, that's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for the community.
This doesn't have to be my closing question, but I want to be respectful of time. At this stage of your life, what midah feels most alive for you right now?
So the midah that's, I think, most important to me right now is chesed, is loving kindness. And this relates a little bit, I wrote my rabbinic thesis about kind of the tension between chesed and following Jewish law in the Torah and in the Talmud. And I really believe that chesed should be a top priority. I did a whole Mussar cycle, actually, where we looked at every single soul trait as a way to help support a chesed lifestyle. And so that's, I think, where I try to orient myself these days. And everything I do, what can make me a kinder person, a more compassionate person. And, that's not easy. But I think it's kind of my overarching mission. And then maybe on a more tactical level, because I'm a rabbi, I have to give more than one answer. It would be the soul trait of order. And order in Hebrew is Seder. So people who are familiar with the Passover Seder, we have a little book. So we do everything in the same order every time. And just with the challenges of this job and kind of keeping track of everything that I do, I need to be very disciplined with my time. I need to say, okay, this is going to be my day off. And these are how I'm going to set my priorities. And so I think kind of for day-to-day living, order is probably the big one for me.
I did, just because you said. I went to the website for and looked through all the stuff and saw. Did you record your entire? Did you read your thesis? Because I saw a thing, or is it just a snippet? Like, if people want to read what you've written about this idea about Judaism as this kind of team law, and Judaism as team chesed, and there being some kind of conflict or synergy between them.
Yeah, I did I had to do a presentation at school of the thesis. So okay. I recorded that, and that's up on the American Mussar YouTube channel. And it's also on the Rabbi Greg Marcus webpage. So you can watch that. It's kind of for a rabbinic audience, but I think it still gives a very good overview. And a couple of people have asked to read my thesis, and my thesis is not user-friendly. It's a thesis.
Academic.
Yeah, it's academic, right. I would love to turn it into a book or a small book or something, but today is not that day.